All right, so just by short way of intro, because this is like such a huge subject, and already someone alluded to the fact that women have this starting point because we're given patriarchy as this universal transhistorical phenomenon. You're doomed. It's basically biologically wired in. It can't be any other way. And I'm going to be sharing information that points to the fact that patriarchy is a historical process. It's overlays and overlays that colonize women, our bodies, our sexuality, our labor, our psyches. And kinship and social organization have political implications, which is why so many of us have been drawn to the subject of matriarchy. It's like, where on this planet have women ever been free and unconstrained by male domination? And so we're trying to visualize alternative ways for human societies that show male domination is not the default. We are primates, and we can go both ways on that. Our closest cousins, we have the bonobos, showing that females succeed best in alliance with other females. And with the chimps, the other way around, they're more isolated and subject to male aggression. So it's like, which wolf will you choose kind of a thing. But the cultural dimension is really important. The female strategies at curbing sexual objectification, female colonization, and actually especially cultural measures to curb aggression in males. And one example of that would be the incest taboo. So I just want to sort of say that overall, because there's so many different angles. And what we're going to be looking at here, and let me go to screen share, is that, I forgot what I was going to say because I'm trying to multitask here. Wait a minute. Here we go. Share. Play from start. There we go. Yeah, that all the cultures we're going to be looking at here, because I'm not going to have time for the historical section that I usually put at the end, are indigenous societies. So not all indigenous societies are matricultures, but all matricultures in our current era are indigenous. So it's really important to look at those societies and that, to see what kinds of different models exist. And so, then the other thing is about language. So we have matriarchy is one of the words derived from this old Latin root matrix, related obviously to the words for mother in Indo-European languages. But in Latin, matrix means womb, source, origin. And then more derivative meanings is the place where something grows or is situated. So like the whole concept mathematically of a matrix is related to this core concept of womb. And we have been struggling for more than 50 years about what do we call these societies, because there was a big backlash against the concept of matriarchy in anthropology. One of the things that happened is they tried to define it as the reverse of patriarchy. And there are no societies where females dominate males. But, so we have a name for something that doesn't exist, but we don't have a name for something that does exist. And they're insisting, no, matriarchy must be this reverse paradigm. And so, all these different names have come up and we've played from them. I came up with matrix culture or matristic, trying to bring it back to the concept of the social support network, to the web of relationships, and then through the matriline, through the mother. And we can talk in the discussion period about why that is structurally different in its implications to patriarchy. But anyhow, and one last thing, and then matricultures, I'm using this a lot in the last few years because people didn't really know matrix culture or matristic societies. People didn't really know what that meant, especially after the movie The Matrix came out and kind of ruined the word in some ways for us. So, structurally, when I talk about structural implications, we are talking about the fact that if you have a matriline, there are no illegitimate children. There are no bastards. There's no stigma on female sexuality. There's not a sexual double standard in the egalitarian forms. Of course, we have these other historical developments where you have, for example, matrilineal and patrilocal, and you can see the history of patriarchy coming in. And I'm going to talk about that if we get to, I think I'll have time to touch on that. But matrilocality is even more important in some ways than the lineage, which is about social belonging and relationship, because if the woman is living among her kin, then there are curbs on male battery and rape, marital rape. And then there's this whole matter of generational spreading. So instead of the nuclear family with the whole weight of caregiving on a individual woman, you have instead a generation of sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, grandmothers and granduncles that are caring for not only children, but disabled people and elders. So there's a lot of different things to consider, but these are what I mean, we're talking really not about absolutes, but constellations of a social organization. So matrilineage is very big. That's a very important one. Mentioned matrilocality, but basically what a lot of times when anthropologists talk about egalitarian societies, they mean by class. They mean no social hierarchy in that sense. But we're talking here really about sex egalitarian. And that by implication in the core indigenous societies means no class hierarchy either. There's no domination. These are communitarian societies, and this is not in a coercive way, but in, again, the sense that it belongs to everyone. And this principle here is really important. Sister brother is a core concept in terms of intersex, between sexes, let's say, relationships. It is sister brother, not husband wife. It's the blood tie, not the legal tie of marriage, which has been invented to tie women down and colonize our procreative power and our labor and our sexuality. I mentioned the shared caregiving, cooperation, non-aggression, importance of female elders. There can be male elders as well, but this is something we don't really miss seeing when we look at anthropological studies, but we do find a big gap in discussion of old women as figures of authority. And relaxed gender modes, gender variance, okay. No stigma on sexuality. Because marriage is not the pivotal organizing principle, then divorce, okay, go ahead, whatever works for you. And then, you have the stability because it's the blood tie. You don't need any coercion to enforce the legal tie of marriage or of, say, for example, father's control over children. And instead of prestige from accumulation, we have prestige from generosity and communal sharing. So this is all in English. What's really interesting is to look at the societies that actually practice these ways and their words for the social system. And I really love this top one, Adat Ibu, which means literally mother-law from Western Sumatra among the Minangkabau. Marumakatayam in Kerala, this is a kind of a stronghold of matrilineage in southwest India, children of the sisters. And that says it pretty clearly. Tauboraga, the way of the ancestors, and this is off the way off the coast of Australia in the Coral Sea, Vanatinai, Path of Life, and then mother clans, milk bond, and I think this is really interesting with the Chickasaw Itabapisili, those who suckled together. So here's the interesting thing, because I said before there's the blood bond, but as strong as that is the social bond of having suckled from the same mother or from the same group of sisters, really. And so rights of adoption do exist in these societies. And sometimes you will actually see an adult man being put to the breast of a female elder. And then after this happens, symbolically, he has joined that milk bond. So, it's not absolute either around the blood tie. Adoption happens in these systems. Concept of one womb is very widespread, and here we see forms of it from Sumatra, Ghana, North Asia. Even in Hebrew, there are these traces of matrilineage. There's some very interesting books that have been written about this. I'm thinking of, what was his name? David Bakan, I think. And they took themselves wives. He has a lot of this information. So B'nai Batni means the children of my womb, or of my belly, really. And Beni Umiya also in, this is actually from Arabic, although it's in North Africa. So there are references in various historical sources to very ancient times. And so in China, in the Zhuangzi, they say that in the very ancient age of Shennong, people cared for their mothers, not their fathers, meaning that motherhood was the pivotal social force. They did not think of harming one another. So again, the non-aggression aspect is remembered in that way. So I want to look at some instances, geographically. As I said before, we're not going to be able to get to all of these, but some of these are societies we've never heard of. And one of the most egalitarian cultures that I've ever found is off the coast of Senegal in the Bisagos Islands. And the Bijogos people, matrilineal, matrilocal, women are religious leaders and elders, and one of the few places in Africa where women still dance the masks. And with marriage, women are the ones who propose. And so a lot of female agency in this society. And this is very interesting because this is from a revolutionary figure, Amilcar Cabral. You know that in our country, there were even matriarchal societies where women were the most important element. On the Bijagos Islands, they had queens. The religious leaders were women too. And so this is still a surviving society. All of these living cultures are going through a lot of pressures with globalization and mass media and all these things coming in, but female initiation ceremonies are being carried out still in Bijogos. And then famously, you've probably heard of the so-called Tuareg, or as they call themselves, the Amazigan. These are the Saharan peoples who have been around for a very long time. Women make the tents, they own the tents, they have their core spatial center of gravity in the matrilineal clans. This is all changing very rapidly, especially in the north, where you have Islamicization proceeding apace. But originally, this would have been on donkeys. Now they're using mostly camels, and a lot of them have been forced out of because of desertification. They're being really disrupted by climate change, among other forces. But here you have them setting up the tent. And in this tradition, it was the women who were the custodians of the Tifinagh alphabet. And we see two versions of it here with their Arabic and Roman equivalents. And women were also culture bearers, playing the amzad. They had sung poetry, which were histories, genealogies, epics, and stories about their people. And so you have a lot of cultural leadership by women in these societies. And this is something that Arabic travelers are already referring to with astonishment, women taking lovers at will, all this kind of thing in the early Middle Ages. Up in the little corner between Eritrea and Ethiopia, you have the Kunama, and we see a lot of images of women drummers. This is a little bit more recent photo. And they also have, in addition to being matrilineal and matrilocal, they have spirit selected priestesses that are called the Andina. And so we see them here in a process where they roam over the land, and they're basically setting up protection. This is a people who's been very impinged upon by invaders from outside. And so they have these ceremonies that are for the well-being of and the safety of the Kunama. So little corner of Sudan, kind of north central Sudan in Kordofan, the Nuba people. And this is one of the cultures which is matrilineal but patrilocal. So you also have polygyny, men taking multiple wives, but each of those women have their own house and their own core lineage. And so here we, women farming sorghum, and this is what the Kunama the Nuba looked like in the 60s. But since then, someday maybe I'll be able to show you the slide later in this series where they're all being, these villages are being bombed and colonized. And so refugees are forced into camps, and the women have to put on full body mufti and also undergo female genital excision in many cases. But in the core symbolism of the culture, you see, for example, the life-giving core, what do you call it? The staff of life, I guess, is the millet and beans. So you've got your complete protein there. But on the walls of the house, you have the breasts of the ancestral woman. And this symbolism is seen in various corners of northeastern Africa. We see it even in the patriarchal Dogon, in their carved doorways and pillars. So some of these cultural themes hang on even after patriarchalization. In West Africa, the Ashanti are among the Akan peoples, all matrilineal societies, Ivory Coast and Ghana. And this is one of the women of the royal lineages. One of the interesting things with Ashanti is that they have co-gendered chieftains, so that you have for every male authority at whichever level, from the royal all the way down to the clan level, you have to have a female counterpart. And this is something that occurs a couple other different places. So that's a really important tradition. An offshoot of the Ashanti are the Baule, who fled over into Ivory Coast under the leadership of Ablapuku, who's shown here. And so she's the founding mother of this ethnicity. And again, a matrilineal society. There's quite a number of those in Cote d'Ivoire, like the Senufo. Here you've got the ancestral mother on a ceremonial staff planted in the ground while the men are planting food. And so you've got this interplay. What's really important to understand is that men buy into this. It's not something imposed by women, but there is a shared relationship to the ancestral woman that goes through all the layers of, agriculture, ceremony, social activity. And I have to say, the Senufo do have the matrilineage, but they also have female genital excision. So you have, especially with the ceremonial societies, the Poro society by oral tradition was taken over by men. And they have male circumcision as a key element in their initiations. And so there's kind of this backwash that happens as women refound their own ceremonial society, because all the traditions say the Poro originally belonged to women and was taken over by men. But the price of this flip over, if you will, is that female genital excision is introduced, in that old era. And so you have this mixture of patriarchy and survival, with the survival of matrilineage. And in various parts of far Western Africa, the Serer and other peoples, you see surviving cultures that are matrilineal. Even in the Ghana Empire that was founded by the Soninke in the 10th century, the Arab sources tell us that those emperors were still following matrilineage. So there's these overlaps that happen historically. We can look at entire regions, and this is really an anthropological term here, the Bantu matrilineal belt. This is very rough. I just made this map, but this region is characterized by matrilineal and primarily also patrilocal societies. So again, that historical process of patriarchy has already begun, and there are structural disadvantages to women in this, and we can talk about that more. I won't go into it in great depth here. But for example, part of these societies, you've got the Bapende in southern Congo, and the house crest is the ancestral woman, and called Kishikishi. So this would be on top, usually, of the chiefly house in the center of the village. And we've got this iconography also showing up in Tanzania, where there's a lot. This is part of that matrilineal belt. And so the Mwana Hiti, literally the mother ancestor, there's a whole load of sculpture representing these. So again, the organizing principle, mythically, historically, ceremonially, socially, economically, is around belonging through a common mother. And so, but also with the Batonga along the Zambezi River, again, some of these are patrilocal societies, others are matrilineal and matrilocal, and you can see all of these names. It's very confusing because the Goba are a form of the Batonga. The Goba in particular have more egalitarian cultural forms. I've seen some pretty patriarchal stuff written about the Batonga. But you've got the womanhood initiations, and something very interesting about these beaded veils. They show up in megalithic statues of women, almost exclusively of women, in southern Ethiopia. We see the beaded veil for several groups of people: divine rulers, medicine people, and female initiates. And the whole concept behind this is that they are in a state of spiritual exaltation or potency, so that the beads go over their face. Part of the concept is that their gaze could be dangerous because it's so powerful. But it also indicates in a way that they're in a state of transformation, or some kind of spiritual charge involved in that. Zambia has a very large number of matrilineal societies, again, patrilocal, so there are some very patriarchal elements to some of these societies. But what's really dramatic is the Luvale people. They're not only matrilineal, but you have this very strong system of female chiefship, and with these characteristic headdresses. So look, she's on this leopard throne, and there are even modern photos. You can see the continuation of public political authority by women. And this picture here is a really bad picture, but Chieftainess Nyakatolo and her Mukwetunga. This is a man of her matriline. And so she is the chief, but he is also, a lot of the matrilineal systems have, or matricultural systems have this concept. The men are not disempowered, but the men often act as delegates or agents to carry out the judgments that are made either by the Women Elders Council or by the both councils of the women and male elders, or by, in this case, by the female chief. So there's this interplay going on there. And so there's a lot of matrilineal peoples in Mozambique. This is an area where also Islamicization has taken place by way of the Indian Ocean. It's kind of a mixed bag. For example, here, I talked before about dancing the masks. You have men dancing the ancestral woman, and women don't do it. So you have these body masks that are worn by men. There are certain kinds of losses that we can track where women are not anymore in ceremonial leadership, and they are basically spectators a lot of the time to public rites that are carried out by men, even in the name of the ancestral women. So you see these slippages taking place. Anyway, Malawi, the Chewa, very, very prominent religious leadership by women. The most important spiritual authority among the Chewa was the Makiwana, and she was the guardian of the rain shrine sacred pool of Malawi, after which the country was named. Okay, going over, Southeast Asia is another area where there's quite a few surviving indigenous peoples who have matrilines, and the Karen of Burma and Thailand. These folks have been really taken it on the face from the military dictatorship of Burma. They're being forced to cross the borders. A lot of them have been in refugee camps. And this is typical what's happening to indigenous people in general, not only the matricultures, but very often, because they're not militarily organized, they're especially vulnerable. But there are some very beautiful examples of, in the highlands of Vietnam, of societies in this matricultural pattern, including these long houses of the Uday, the Jarai, the Sedang, various peoples. And we're going to see more about those long houses as we go along, but here's a close-up. And so you've got the ancestral woman and the ancestral brother. So again, that sister-brother pairing. And then here they are represented on these ladders that you go up onto the raised, this is rainforest area. So, raised houses. And so this motif of the necklace and breast is something very widespread. We see it in the Ethiopian megaliths, the Western European megaliths, especially in France, Spain, and Italy, a lot of other parts of the world, just very highly symbolic of the ancestral woman. And the Chinese perception of Vietnam, the characters written here actually say Nü Ren Guo, country of women. Here they are, women drummers on a bronze drum, which we know of archaeologically. So it's not that there were no men in Vietnam, but these are perceptions which we see replicated also in the English colonization of North America, the Chinese referring to kingdoms of women in Eastern and Western Tibet. This is an old map based on Chinese sources. And so various names that they're using, Nü Wang, the country of women, Nü Erguo, the country of daughters, country of queens, of girl children, and so on. And this is very much to do with the perception from outsiders of a matricultural society. So one of those areas in the eastern regions bordering Tibet and China, in Yunnan, are the Mosuo. And this is, again, one of the very egalitarian examples that still exist. I mean, they too are under heavy pressure from the sex industry, for one thing, tourist industry. But the social unit is a female elder, a bunch of sisters and brothers, and The men go off to visit their lovers in other places, but they come back home because they work in the fields with their sisters. And they live around Lugu Lake. There is a mountain mother, which is the primary deity who is their protector. And you have both women and men here. She's working the plow, working in the fields together. Again, that's that sister-brother bond. Also, lots of the Moswo really became stereotyped as free love society because there's no sexual double standard. They don't even really have marriage. And so this is what's led all the sex tourists to be coming in there and, oh, you know, we can get ourselves some. And so this has been a very corrupting, oppressive force on the Moswa. Then not too far away, you have the Lahu people who span across the modern borders of China and Thailand. And there's a very interesting book about them called Chopsticks Always Come in Pairs that talk about, this is like what I was saying before about the Ashanti, both a female and a male form of any type of social office has to be exist. So here we've got the man with the baby strapped on his back chopping vegetables, and over here the woman is stripping banana fibers. And this region is really, really rich. In the Lahu society, also we have the Wu Wei Gao, which is the name for the female elder. They have medicine women, sexual, lack of sexual repression, beautiful ceremonies. And also the Lisu, neighboring people, you have female courtship. So in a lot of these Southeast Asian societies, they have long houses, but they also have a special house for the youth. And so courtship and carrying on can happen in those spaces. There's no stigma on sexuality, but here we see female sexual initiative being highlighted in this region. And also with the Lisu, the women, the elder woman's authority over anything political happening. This is from a male elder. Women had the right to stop war by the custom. The two sides had to stop fighting if a woman if either side waves her skirt and calls for an armistice. And something very similar to this exists among the Vanatinai in the Southwest Pacific. Laos, like Zambia, mostly matrilineal. This was really a shock to me when I found this out. Again, patriarchality, and there are patriarchal elements in most of these societies. But, there are these pockets that we're not told about this. You have to really dig to find legal exceptions to male domination in different parts of the world. And one of the most famous is the Minangkabau rice farming society in Western Sumatra. And these are the people I talked about before with the Adat Ibu. You can just see from the bearing of these women, the center of gravity is here. Matrilineal, matrilocal. The women wear a water buffalo headdress. The house also has the form of the water buffalo horns. This is a symbolism that's very widespread throughout Indonesia and Malaysia, into Melanesia. But here's the story about the water buffalo. The Javanese Empire conquers Sumatra, and they force the Minangkabau to convert to Islam, and they agree on the provision that they keep their Adat Ibu. But the story about this is that the Minangkabau, who are not militarily organized, propose to the Javanese that they will have a duel, that their water buffalo will fight the water buffalo of the Javanese. So the Javanese bring in this big, heavy bull, but the Minangkabau bring a little calf along, and it runs up to the bull and tries to suckle from its penis. And so the bull is like, whatever, but the bull is not going to attack this little baby. It's like totally beneath him. And so the Minangkabau win, and they get their treaty terms. So the central pillar of the rumah, the longhouse, is named for the first woman, Bungdu Kanduang. So she's the founder of their society and the sort of the emblem of the matriarchal mother. Because it's Islamic society, and you can see the hijab starting to come in here, but the bride comes to collect the groom because he is going to join her society. And check this out. There they are praying in the Muslim manner, but the bride is sitting in front of the groom. And again, it's really much a female-centered situation. However, in the years since these photos were taken, most of the women have developed hijab. Female genital excision has come in. I can't really date that, but it's pervasive now. And the mullahs have increasing authority, so that we're watching the historical diminishment of this female-centered organization gradually taking place. Sulawesi also has some matrilineal societies. Among the Toraja, we have a very strong role for women in ceremonial, especially the ancestor ceremony. And if we go to, nobody's ever really heard of this hardly, but Maluku, the Moluccas Islands, they used to call them the Spice Islands. There's a very strong orientation to the matriline, and you have these Lulu altars with the ancestral mother and all the generations there on her headdress. There are quite a lot of these carvings. Here's another one with offering table out in front of her and the very tall headdress. And so this is we just don't, part of our problem is we're not told about these alternate forms of social organization. And this is something very deliberate, is the omissions, the distortions, the deletions of matricultural societies. And, you know, that also goes for patriarchal law. They don't really document this for you. We can go into the Pacific. There are also quite a few matrilineal societies, such as the Chamorro of Guam, and very, very strong matrilocality. It kind of varies. In Micronesia, you have both patrilineal and matrilineal setups. But in Palau, or Palau, as you'll see it written also, this is the emblem that is placed over the center of the men's house in the village. The women run the home, the men have their collective space in the men's house, but they have to go in between the legs or under the legs of the birthing mother in order to go into their space. And so, you know, here this woman is talking about the fact that land comes from the mother, so that the husband is not the definitive factor. Matriline just determines where you belong and what belongs to you as well. They do have a taboo on women's public speaking. So again, you see this erosion taking place, but this is a Palauan activist, Bernie Calderman. She says, it's really the women who make things move. Nothing really happens until the women decide. So it's kind of that formality of men in front, women pulling strings from behind. And so this one says, this is the Marshall Islands now. Men talk, women make decisions. So this seems to be pretty well embedded. And of course, we have the Marshallese fighting because, you know, Bikini Island and some of the others were used as U.S. nuclear bombing test sites. And now you've got the rise of the oceans threatening all of them as well. So this is just a listing of some of the places I found that did have matrilineage throughout the Southern Pacific and over into Melanesia. Tokelau, very much a threat from sea rise. They have this category of Tamafafine, female descendants. They were in charge of the food. The senior women, and that title means rock of the house foundation, they govern the land. And in Melanesia, there are a lot of patrilineal societies, but there are also some matrilineal societies, but again, patrilocal and polygynous. So again, a mixed bag. One of the things that happens is that when you have matrilineage and patrilocality, is the woman goes out away from her kin and she loses contact with them. I mean, I don't mean literally losing contact, but they're not around her. So she has to function within a male-dominated structure in her marriage. Here's Vanatini. And so the grass skirt here, remember the story about the woman waving her skirt to stop fighting. This prevailed there as well. So again, a matrilocal society. Maria Lepowski wrote a book about them. And she said this is one of the most egalitarian societies that exists. The only difference that I could really make out strongly was that the mourning requirements for women were much more stringent than for men. But women can become, you know, in anthropology, they talk about big men. They have big women also. The Jiaja, which means big givers in Vanatini. There's that source if you want to look her up. Now, moving back over to the mainland of South Asia, in far northeast of India, you have the Khasi people. In Meghalaya, you've probably read about them. And their term for the ancestral woman, mother of the root, Kikauyobe Tinre. So again, social organization around the mother, the very closely related Jaintia, also in Meghalaya, and this whole region all the way up into further south in northeast India, the Garo, a little less egalitarian in some way, but their clan word still means mothers. And they are longhouse peoples. So all through Malaysia, through Southeast Asia, in a lot of these societies, the entire kindred lives in the longhouse. So again, back to that communitarian nature of things. Now, before I talked about Marumakatayam, sisters' children, these are groups in Kerala, and you've probably heard of the Nayar, but the Mapila are very interesting because this name is derived from the word for mother and child. And they are Muslims. So what happens in India, it's very interesting because the caste system is so wed to patriarchy. The Mapila and other oppressed castes in Kerala converted to Islam to get out from under the very stringent caste avoidance rules of the dominant society. And so the Ejava and Koyas and other groups, some of the Dalit peoples also in South India have converted in that same way. The Nayar in Kerala are the most famous as a matrilineal society. The British Empire, the Raj, really did its best to try and dismantle this. Maybe it was already in decline, but you have this is more of a they're in the Kshatriya caste, so the military caste. You also have groups that converted to Christianity, which are also sometimes in matrilineal pattern. And then the Dalit, which you'll find both patrilineage and matrilineage amongst some of these societies. But really, there's the overlap between the old Aboriginal groups, and then the Dalit become, I wouldn't say integrated, but they come in as the most oppressed group inside the Hindu caste system. But they're really descended from First Nations peoples. We saw before the longhouses of Vietnam. Here's an example of the Rungus Sabah in Malaysia. And then here's an example of longhouses in Central Europe. Maybe somebody can tell me what time I'm at, because oh wait, I see it now. So I have a little bit, just write in chat if I have more time, because I can maybe go into some of this. So longhouse is also a pattern that we see in Neolithic Europe. They were certainly something that very strong pattern in Northeast America. So famously, the Six Nations of the Iroquois call themselves Haudenosaunee, which means people of the longhouse. So you've got the corn drying up there again. This is really, women are the economic powerhouse of these societies, and they control the food supply. And their legal system, as we see, is very much structured, again, around the matriline. But the Lenape, or the so-called Delaware, also had longhouses. These are bark covered longhouses. We see similar kinds of lodges among the Mi'kmaq in eastern Canada. And so looking at North America, this is our Iroquois artist showing the women during the 1700s. We have the Wabanaki Confederacy. And so some of these peoples, more than others, do follow matrilineal customs, particularly the Maliseet really confronted a lot of oppression from the Canadian state for their matricultural ways. But again, these ideas of cooperation, there are various kinds of decolonization efforts going on to reaffirm the values of their social systems. I have some old pictures of Maliseet women. But the Lenni Lenape, or the Lenape as they're usually called, referred to as the Delaware, and this is back colonization legacy on some English word. But matrilineal and matrilocal. And all of the Algonquian speakers recognize them as, quote unquote, the grandfathers. Most of these speakers are in patrilineal societies. So it's kind of like weird that you've got a matriculture being referred to by a masculine title. But I saw a lot of references to them as patrilocal, and there's just something felt wrong about it. And by researching this, I eventually discovered that there had been a historical transformation. One of the early finds that I was traveling in the 70s around to different museums, and I found this amazing, this is my photo, it was not good lighting, the Odas, the grandmother, they're doll makers. And this is the example of the sacred doll, where you have spiritual and social significance attached to these images, very finely made. But so this is the region that was originally occupied by the Lenape people. Here's the core area, and then you've got this kind of intermediate region, and this is where the Wabanaki lived, still live. And, you know, a lot of these are very inundated because it's been more than 500 years of conquest. So the white society just goes along as it is without even having anything to think about it. But the Lenape underwent at least 6 relocations. And so they get kicked over to Pennsylvania, and then to Ohio, and then to Indiana, and then they're pushed out over to Kansas, and then eventually to Oklahoma. And so during this forced migration, women's sphere of farming and the household took a big hit, and men's sphere of military protection was to the forefront because they were fighting not only the European overrun of North America, but they were also fighting often people in the countries they came into as refugees. So this gave men a leg up, and this is how the patrilineage came about. So here, this is just not about a century ago here. A lot of these peoples had to reconstitute themselves in Oklahoma, and a great number of them who were forced out through the Trail of Tears were matrilineal societies like the Cherokee, the Muskogean peoples, the Lenape. But although this patrilineage came in, the patrilocality came in, you have the Lenape man saying, he is my father, but not my relative. So relationship is still very much defined by the mother line. And here again, this is very comparable to what we saw with the Chinese in Southeast Asia, is you have the perceptions of the European colonials coming in there, and they were gobsmacked to find that they were expected to deal with women as chieftains and diplomats. So here is Alaquipa of the Delaware, or the Lenape, meeting with Lieutenant George Washington. And, you know, they write about this. And this is also true of the Cherokee. So they had an office that was known as the Higao, which was basically a woman who was the go-between between the Women's Council and the Men's Council. But she had especially very important diplomatic and even military elements to her leadership. This is obviously modern visualization of her, of Nanyehi, who was a historic Higao that was really trying to help the Cherokee hang on to some of their land and tried to prevent them from being wiped out militarily by the Anglo armies. Modern painting by Cherokee artists and connection of women with Selu, who is the Corn Mother. And, you know, you can get kind of a glimpse here of what historically the Cherokee regalia looked like. And this is from a woman artist and a little more recent types of dress. And again, the woman is speaker. She speaks for her clan. So you see the clan images up above them here in this photo. Women's authority as a structural part of the society. So the Cherokee leader, Atakulakula, a man, right, is confronting the English and saying, where are your women? Because they would send these all-male delegations to have parleys, and to the Cherokee, if there were no women present in the delegation, it meant that their intentions were war. And this is something these kinds of challenges also come up from Iroquois men talking to both the French and the English, who disdained female power. And so this is a piece that was recorded where some unknown, they call him Good Peter of the Iroquois, and he says, brothers, our ancestors considered it great offense to reject the counsels of their women, particularly of the female governesses. They were esteemed the mistresses of the soil. This is part of the Kayanerekoa, the great law of peace, which lays down that the lineal descent shall go in the female line. Women are progenitors of the nation. They shall own the land and soil. Men and women shall follow the status of their mothers. And so in this constitution, women elders, which are called actually not female governesses, but gantowisas, They select male chiefs. Here again, that concept of men as agents who carry out the will of the female and male councils. And if they need to, they can knock the horns off the male chief, which means that they disinstate him. Seneca scholar Barbara Mann, the men's council could take no political action before the women's council forwarded it over for deliberation. So a lot of structural forms centering women and putting curbs on men who would otherwise perhaps rise into domination roles. That's the Iroquois. Now, at this point, I don't know, I want to check with you, Donnie, and others to, I mean, I have more stuff, but we're running up to, shall I continue a little bit more, or do you want to go for a discussion? We can always come back and resume with this, but maybe it would be a good time to break for discussion.
Yeah, it's up to you. So we were saying that could speak for an hour, in which case you've got another 5 or 10. But if you feel
okay,
it's a good spot for an actual break, so it's down to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can skim through some of this other imagery and then we can have the discussion if you prefer to do it that way. I mean, I just basically run through a lot of the other historical matrilineal societies in North America. And so we're looking here at the Seminole. Some of the peoples that you don't necessarily know very much. There's a place called Wichita, Kansas, but there was actually a Caddoan speaking group of people called the Wichita who were matrilineal and matrilocal. And here the women are building these beautiful houses, the thatched prairie grass houses that they made. I mean, look at this. That's so awesome. I've been in one of these buildings, by the way, that the Caddo made in East Texas. In the northern plains, you have the Mandan and Hidatsa. These are matrilines that live in earth lodges. They're semi-subterranean, so they're cool in the summer and they're warm in the winter. Farming peoples, the women were big-time gardeners. They were also ceremonial leaders. There was a women's ritual society, and some of this comes through in the early paintings by George Catlin and others. Here you can see an example of one of these headdresses that they wore. And this is still going on. Here's a lodge blessing in modern time. And the gardening, they have a whole cosmology built around our old woman who never dies. And she's the one who sends messengers in the form of the geese and the ducks and various water birds to tell them when it's time to plant the corn, the beans, the squash. In the Northwest coast, the Tsimshian people, Western Canada, one of the matrilines. Most of these societies are now patrilineal, but there are a fair number of matrilines, including among the Haida in Haida Gwaii, the islands off the coast of okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, I can continue or we can discuss. It's up, you know, I don't know if that was an error, but
oh no.
Are we okay?
Oh.
Are you? Are we okay? Can you see the screen?
We lost you for about 3 minutes and now you're back.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, why don't we go to discussion now? And if we still have time later, I can show you more. How's that?